It's 1 o'clock on Thursday, and we are going to hear about how the child tax credit that we passed is actually being implemented, and who is benefiting from it, and who are really going to be behind. Pat, you want to join us? Thanks. Welcome to the committee in 2024.
Thank you. Yeah, first, glad to see you all. I hope you all are feeling rejuvenated. There should be, so Patrick Titterton, Joint Fiscal Office. There should be 2 documents under my name on your committee's website, one of which is a set of slides, which I'll be sharing, and another one is just the issue brief, which is available on our website, which it references. So. It's always nice wearing glasses because I can tell the screen changes by the reflection off the.
Is that actually nice?
Well, I know it popped up, so I don't have to ask.
Sometimes I have a lot of 7 to me.
Chris. So, there is a issue brief that I wrote that is available to all of you. It is a 1-year look back, so it is the results from the changes you made effective for tax year 2022. So they showed up on the tax returns that everyone filed this past year. We got the final results from the tax department in early November. So there might have been a little bit of shifting around, you know, from auditing or people straggling, that kind of stuff. But these should ultimately be pretty up-to-date. There's a few things we'll cover, just an overview of the structure of the credit that you all passed. Just some basic statistical facts that we found of how many people and how many kids and so forth. And then we'll look a little deeper at income distribution. So where people within that threshold, like who was claiming at what income band, how the children are claimed based on income as well. And then the marital status, which actually had some somewhat interesting findings. And then thirdly, we also looked at the interplay between this particular credit and some other sort of kid or work-focused credits that are available to Vermonters. So with that, just as a quick refresher, so you all passed this in 2022, Act 134, which made it effective for the first time for tax year 2022. Taxpayers with kids who are age of 5 or under were eligible, but they had to have income or AGI that was below 175,000. And that threshold applied for all filing statuses. It was not, doesn't differ like some other credits do based on whether you're single, head of household, or married. And it's also fully refundable, meaning if your tax liability is negative, you get a check for the difference. Claimants are eligible for $1,000 per eligible child if they have income up to $125,000. After that, there's a phase-out range at 2% per $1,000 of additional income. So that's basically $20 off for each $1,000 you earn. So it totally phases out at that upper threshold of $175,000. So that's just a quick refresher on the structure. If we're all good, we can look at some basic statistical findings. So overall, for tax year 2022, there were about 21,000 tax returns which claimed the child tax credit. They claimed about 27,000 kids, all of them the age of 5, right? And they received about $25.1 million from this credit. I guess I'll just, spoil something from later on, but usually the highest personal income tax expenditure that we have is the EITC. But this year, actually, this was the largest. So this was providing the most financial support to these families within these income thresholds.
Can you remind me how much we thought it was going to?
So this actually came below estimate and I think there's a lot of factors going on there. One of which is that not everyone who is eligible necessarily has to file taxes. They're not required to file taxes, so they may not have known that they should and could claim this. So presumably there could be some outreach that could still be done to sort of pull more people into it. But yeah, ultimately, I don't think that that explains the full gap between our estimate. And I put emphasis on the word estimate because it's always tricky, between our estimate and what we actually found. But I think it could explain some of that.
So this was refundable, maybe you have this later, but like, is there details about who got this back as like credit versus a fundable credit?
So is there information?
Is it owed versus?
Like they got an actual check rather than just, I don't have that information. I could follow up with the tax department. I don't know if they would specifically be able to tease that out simply because a lot of these people are going to be eligible for other refundable credits also. So it'd be difficult to say if it's specifically because of this or, EITC or one of those other ones. Just taking a note. So kind of to getting a little bit more towards your question also, the people who claim this filed in a number of different ways. So first of all, most people file electronically now. That's true for this population also. About 97% of them were filing electronically. And of those, about 227 filed through this program called the IRX Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Program, or VITA, which is something the IRS provides on a volunteer basis for people who are disabled, low income, or have low English speaking proficiency, which makes it difficult for them to file their taxes. There are some other free tax filing options available to people. And there, I have a link there to the tax department's website for several that they work with frequently. But, predominantly, it looks like most people who are filing this are not using paid providers. You see this second to last bullet here, about 41% of claimants filed their taxes using a paid provider. So their CPA they've been working with, TurboTax, those types of providers. So, what that says is about, 59% of claimants here were using some form of free tax preparation service. So, are there any questions on that point?
Representative Brannigan.
I have a question on page before. So and I know I should know this, it says taxpayers with children under 5. So that means children who are 0 or only months old, and children who are 1, 2, 3, and 4, but when they have their 5th birthday, they're no longer eligible, right?
So correct me if I'm wrong in some of the policy thinking behind this. A lot of that had to do with the fact that it was 0 to 4 is pre-kindergarten. And, once they're in kindergarten in the school system, they're going to be lower child care costs for them.
This was not actually the policy thinking. The policy thinking was that we looked at folks, it was very much not, very like the conversation around child care costs was very separate from the conversation on the child tax credit. But we actually looked at incomes and, when folks have young kids, it's actually their lowest income period, regardless of what their spending is. Because you have sort of less ability to engage in the workforce or just, anyone who had kids remembers what a slog those first couple of years are. And basically the inflection point of people's incomes going up is around that time. And it might be because they have more mental space because their kids are hanging on less tightly to their knees. And it might be because they go to kindergarten, but we were sort of mapping people's incomes.
That's why I wanted you to correct me.
No, thank you.
We had to start out at 6 and under, I think.
Then brought it to 5 and under, yeah.
Well, under 5, right? It's still the answer to the question. Is it 5-year-olds also, or is it stop 4-year-olds?
It's 5 and under.
So if you're 5 years old.
You can claim.
Sorry, that is a typo there. It says under 5. It should be 5 and under.
So 5 plus 11 months, they can still qualify.
Yes, it's your age as of December 31st of that tax year. So those are the basic results. We have four sort of key findings, which I don't know if any of them will be particularly surprising. But most of the CTC claimants were from low and moderate income households. We sort of have this defined by sort of three buckets, which you'll see in a moment. But that's because predominantly that's where a lot of Vermonters' incomes fall. So that kind of mirrors sort of the actual distribution of incomes in the state. Looking, and this is, I'm couching this moderate and higher income, not higher income household claimants tended to claim more children on average. So the more money they were reporting, the more likely they were to have more children. You'll see it's not super significant, the difference, but we'll look at that. And then married claimants were more likely to be higher income, while single claimants were more likely to be lower income. Again, sort of mirroring the overall distribution. There was also significant overlap between this and the EITC and CDCC. And there were also many claimants who claimed all three of those credits, which I'll have a very large table towards the end where we can look at how that all shakes out. So the first section to look at here is the income distribution of recipients. Approximately 92% of Vermont taxpayers are income eligible, meaning that they might not have eligible age kids, but they're eligible based on income. So you see that for the most part, most people in the state are eligible based on their income. And then those with lower income make the majority of claimants, but as income increases, filers are more likely to be eligible to claim the CTC. So if we look at the table here, so in that first row, so $75,000, 5.6% of income eligible people are also eligible based on kids. So there's 5.6% percent of claimants, or sorry, tax filers who are eligible based on income also have age eligible children. And what you see here is if as you go up that income scale, they're more likely within their cohort to have age eligible children than those lower income people. So, you'll see here in that middle column, by far the most claimants fall under that $0 to $75,000 range. That's that 12,000 claimants. But as you go up, you have fewer and fewer claimants, but the share within that cohort's going up. So I'll pause there. It's a lot of relatives that I'm saying. Does that all check out?
Is that just simply because folks, as they move up in the income bracket, they're also likely to have more kids? Got kids? Is that?
I mean, the logic checks out to me. I don't have anything to sort of support that with the data that I have, because, it's more likely, as you get older and you have higher income, that you're more likely to have more kids.
Yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily mean you're more likely to have age eligible.
Right, okay, yeah.
So
Just one time.
it's kind of a factor of time, which makes sense, like you're saying.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Thanks, Bill.
I'm so sorry, Julia.
It's,
I hope by year 4,
You're still
I
uncomfortable
am
now.
able to see you.
Are there scenarios under which a family would be eligible for the credit, but for whatever reason, maybe not be aware of it or not file for it?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, if you are earning less than sort of the standard deduction amount, you're not required to file your taxes. You should. You're not required to because you're guaranteed to have no tax liability or negative, right? So it's possible that there are people within that cohort who are not filing taxes because they're not required to, but should because they can claim this credit. Similarly, it's possible that there are people who do file their taxes, but I guess I don't know the particular people, but we saw there's about 600 filing paper returns. It could be that they just didn't know that they should check off that box. From my personal experience, I use like an online service to file my taxes, and They're typically very good about prompting you about life events, but there's certainly things that could fall between the cracks. Yeah.
Representative Meadows, Representative.
I'm just curious, in the, like, 0 to 75,000, that's the bulk of the income eligible filers. Does that include like retirees too, that probably make less? That could make
Yeah.
less, so it's not. Could you look at it if somebody's claiming a dependent on their tax return to get that number?
Yeah, that's probably something we could filter for.
Because otherwise you can look at people that are, you know, out of the workforce under retirement, which generally earn less.
Have custody of a grandchild or something.
No, I'm just looking at if you can tie this report to somebody that claims a dependent, if it would fall, like how much that 221,000 would change. I'd imagine it'd be quite a bit. Because then you can see if it's actually, lower income people have more children, or if that still flows through that way.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to tell the future. I would suspect that it would still be a similar progression as you go up in income.
Yeah.
But it would certainly tighten that gap. And, to that point also, there are going to be people within those other two bands that are also, not claiming dependents or retired. So, yes, I can look into that.
Because then also if you're filing single, you're not married, that means only one of the parents can claim the credit.
Certainly.
And you could be almost double counted in the.
Yeah, part of the issue with breaking it out too many ways comes down to, which I'm sure is all your favorites, is disclosure issues.
Yeah.
With getting, and
Yeah.
that kind of especially was coming into play when we were trying to look at free credits sort of overlapping with each other, because you do really like get down to below
Yeah.
10 people within a category.
Okay.
Back to you.
So the last little nugget on here that I had dug up was that, so kind of getting back to the question you asked about people who are not required but do, there were 128 claimants who reported negative income, while at the same time, there were also another 61 who reported zero income. So presumably a lot of these people are sort of right on that cusp, or also know that they can get this credit and they know that they should file their taxes. There's probably many other specific instances within this group of people, but those are some of those people who are probably aware and know to be claiming this. Okay. So this is, again, looking at this sort of similar information in a different format. That top sort of dark gray is that highest income cohort people. The lighter shade of gray is the 75 to 125,000, and then the dark is the up to 75. You see here that, again, as a share of the total income eligible filers, those up to 75,000 income people are sort of relatively underrepresented. But again, kind of comes back to your point that we have some people in there who are not claiming dependents at all. Again, you see that both those top two bands, again, they're sort of relatively overrepresented. You go from 18.5% to 27%, and you go from 8.4% to 13.9%, just showing that they make up a larger share of CTC recipients than they do of total filers. Good. And then, so claimants with lower income claim the CTC at lower rates for some of the aforementioned reasons, which indicates that these lower income households are less likely to have age eligible children. Makes sense. However, there's likely a cohort, to your point earlier, that either don't file their taxes or don't know to claim it. This is just showing you that those earlier income cohorts broken out a little more granularly, they are again being sort of underrepresented or relatively disproportionately claiming or under eligible. So that's everything I have for income distribution. Before we move on to the distribution of children, I'll just pause Seems like
I think we're good. No need to pause.
okay. So this is getting back to that second bullet point I had under key findings. You'll see here that, and now we're looking solely at CTC claimants, right? We're not comparing to total tax filers. You'll see here that there's sort of an inflection point right at about $50,000 where the average number of children within that income band is going above the overall average. So on average, across the entire income spectrum for this credit, 1.294 children are being claimed. So below about 50,000, you're getting 1.28, 1.25. And as you go up the income scale, like we were talking about, that actually sort of becomes opposite. So above that, you're more likely to be claiming more children, although you'll see that the numbers here are really not super different. So there doesn't seem to be a huge differentiation between that, but there is some difference. And again, so looking at the last chart in a
Can I
slightly,
check in with something that I think I heard you say? So I think sort of the first frame that I heard on this was that like people with more money are more likely to have more children. And then I heard you say that it's sort of as someone gets older, they're more likely to make more money and they have more time to have children. I just want to sort of offer that like both of those things, they're just completely different frames on the exact same data.
yeah.
And I don't know if it matters. I just think like we all tell stories about this stuff and those are such different stories from like basically the same sentence. I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
No, I mean, you're totally right. I mean, there are some narratives that you can offer. I don't have anything sort of concrete data-wise to back up sort of the narrative, but it makes sense when you say it. Just that, you know, as you get older, you'll become later career, right? So more likely to have more earnings. And as you get older, you're more likely to have, you know, had that time to have those kids.
To have a second child.
It's just like it's a game of probabilities, right? Which, you know, I don't have anything from the tax data that we received to back that up, but, you know, it sort of makes sense to me.
And I mean, I have no idea what, like which frame is true. They could all be true. I just sort of wanted to offer that there are lots of ways of interpreting.
Sure.
Yes.
Just briefly, couples make decisions based on their immediate economic and social and all kinds of environment, and that's beyond our control.
Do they?
Not always.
Not always. Well,
I
anyway,
mean, that's the thing. That's the part, like, I really don't know if they do or
well, I
don't.
guess what I'm saying is, this is all interesting stuff to hear about. But I don't think there are any definitive patterns that we can use as predictors. Let's settle that.
I think that's fair. Okay, so looking at marital status, again, I think as we're talking about narratives here, I don't think anything in this next section will be sort of surprising. But so the majority of children, so about 64%, almost 64%, are claimed by married filers, and this is among CTC claimants. And then, you know, conversely, about 36% are claimed by single filers or unmarried filers. Except the distribution of the children claimed across these two sort of filing statuses is sort of inverted. And it will make sense. So lower income single filers were more likely to claim children than higher income single filers. And then conversely, higher income married filers seem to be not quite as significantly, but seem to be a little bit more likely to claim children than lower income married filers. And looking at that, so lower income single filers more likely to claim children, or to be to claim more children, than higher income single filers. And then higher income married filers more likely than lower. So it's just switching the higher or lower income words there. So here we've got 3 bars. The black bar refers to the total amount of children claimed within that income cohort. The middle bar refers to the married number of children claimed within that cohort. And then the far right is single or unmarried. Yeah, so you see in this first cohort, it's the only cohort where it's more likely that a single filer is going to be claiming children than a married. So it's more likely that this cohort is going to be single than married, or the children in this cohort. But once you get to that next cohort, 125 or 75 to 125, that's where you see it invert quite a bit. So what we're seeing here is that the children within these cohorts are much more likely to be claimed by married filers than they are by single filers. And I think that again comes back to sort of the idea of earning potential. So single adult households are more likely to be single income. They have to be, right? There's no way for them to be dual. Whereas married households, they have that option for the dual income, which sort of increases their earnings potential. So that's why we feel that we're seeing that, it's more likely that if you're a low income household or your child living in a low income household, you're more likely to be being claimed by a single adult tax filer. And then as you go up, you see that the married households become much more predominantly the households that are claiming children. So seeing a couple of quizzical looks. Are there any questions on that?
The only thing that I'm having trouble with when you say this, more likely to claim them. We don't, for me, it's eligible, if they're eligible and then they also claim, rather than just claim them. I don't know how many, in each of those things, are you, how do I know how many children are eligible that weren't claimed?
Eligible that weren't claimed. We don't know that. So we don't know the number of kids who are eligible, both because they're under 5 and because the household was under their income threshold. We don't know that. We can attempt to estimate it, but it gets pretty fuzzy. That really comes down to, again, I think the original question that Representative Andrews had, which was how many people are eligible for this who aren't claiming it? We don't know. So this is just what we were able to glean from the returns that the tax department received.
So did you look at birth records for each year and say, this many births are in Vermont?
Mm-hmm. And actually, what was great was because we did all that work on the child care bill last year, we did a lot of that estimating the number of kids. So we were able to sort of eyeball between how many, Joyce actually put this together, estimates there were for how many kids there were with how many were actually being claimed. And it's in the ballpark that we would expect, especially given, what we would expect for people who should be filing but aren't. And I've talked to the tax department about this a little bit. This is not a firm estimate that they provided, but sort of something they've looked at, and they think it's in the region of 75 or 17% of people who should be filing taxes don't. Now they have said that's sort of a soft estimate to me, not a hard one. But that sort of gives you a scale of the number of, okay, if we were to say that this is the 17% of people who should be filing here aren't, maybe 5% should be eligible. That gets us right about in that range of what Joyce was estimating for kids that are 5 and under. So it passes the sniff test. Yeah.
Well, I don't know if this is really worth taking time, but I was thinking, how could we get the word out to these parents who qualify but are not filing? And it's been several years since I've had children that age, but I remember that if a preschool year, but the younger than 5 years old, my oldest was 3 when I brought the third one home from the hospital. So I had little kids. I know that's saying, well, I suppose that's debatable, but the doctor's office. That was the place where we got information about all kinds of things. And of course, the doctors are a little hesitant too, because they don't want to shy anyone away from coming to the doctor's office. Oh, brother, I'm going to get asked if I filed a tax return and what my income is. And, so they have to be very careful. But that's a good place where everybody goes, most everyone goes. homes. And it's a trusted place, so it could be a resource.
I think that's really relevant. I think, so after we finish hearing about sort of what did happen, we're gonna talk with public assets about sort of, thinking about what's still possible.
Yeah.
We want it? Okay, thanks.
So this is the last section, and I am conscious of the time. But this is where we're gonna look at those overlapping credits, the CTC, the EITC, and the CDCC. So what we got back from the tax department was that among those 21,000 claimants, 18,000 also were claiming the EITC, which was about almost 40% of the CTC claimants. About 6,000 were also claiming the CDCC, so almost 30, and then almost 1,000 were claiming all three of the credits. Just sort of showing you sort of the scale of the financial support that's being provided to those filers. And I'll look, we have a nice table later that shows you all the amounts, but just to focus on the EITC for a second. So I mentioned earlier that the child tax credit was about $25.1 million in value to those claimants this year. That eclipsed the EITC by almost $1 million. So in total, people claimed about $24.4 million from the EITC this past year, and that's all filers. So among EITC recipients, about 21,000 claimed at least one eligible dependent and received $22.7 million from the credit. So this is just winnowing out all of the single EITC recipients. So comparing just to those recipients of the EITC who are claiming a dependent, we can compare that to the CTC recipients where their dependent has to be under 5 years or younger, right? So if we look at that, they received, so they made up 24.5% of total EITC claimants, which was about $9.2 million or almost 40% of those, of the total amount of EITC received. We just looked at those ones claiming dependents. It moves up, it jumps up to almost 40% of the EITC claimants being also CTC claimants. And yeah, again, they received about 40.6% of the total EITC value within that cohort. So those are very significant chunks of the EITC that's also being claimed by CTC recipients. Just indicating that, so the EITC is meant for working families, right? And it's scaled very much towards supporting those with dependents more heavily than without. And you just see here that a very large proportion of them are with kids five years and younger, and they're receiving a very significant chunk of the overall value of that credit. So then we'll move to the CDCC. The distribution here is different, and a lot of that has to do with the income thresholds for the EITC being very different than for the CDCC. So it has broader income and eligibility, but a filer does have to have eligible expenses for that. So that, again, that could be like childcare expenses that are eligible. And so here it's quite different, whereas EITC is all under 75,000. Under 75,000 for the CDCC, about 15.9% also claimed the CDCC. For those earning from 75 to 125, about 42% are also claiming the CDCC. And then those in that top income cohort, about 55 of them are also claiming the EITCC, or CDCC, so many acronyms. So it's just showing you as you're going up the income scale, you're seeing that it appears to be more likely that people are having those CDCC eligible expenses and more likely to be receiving that credit also. So this is the last slide, and this is the table which sort of shows you all the numbers by cohort and the overlapping values. So you'll see on the far left, that's where we just have the value of the CTC. It's at 25.1 million. And then just moving to the right, you see by income cohort how many people are also claiming the other two credits and how much the value they're actually getting from those credits. One note I want to make is that the far right, that value asterisk, that is the value of all three credits combined, whereas the values under the other credits are just associated with that credit. And so sort of what I mean there is those who received all three credits received approximately 2.5 million. And on average, they're receiving about $2,500 from all of those three credits combined. Just showing you that, that can be, especially for low income households, that's quite a significant, financial support relative to a lot of other credits that are available. And so that's what I have. I know this is sort of what has happened in this past year, and next year going to talk about what there still could be. But if there are any other questions, I can cede it to the next witness.
Migrant workers, we did something for migrant children last time. We talked about this, I think.
The last session, you made it possible for individuals without tax identification numbers to be eligible for the EITC and CTC. I believe they were to be assigned a number by the tax department to file their taxes. And to date, I'm not sure, that would be in effect for what the results we'll get for next year, not what we got for tax year 22. So potentially next year, we'll be able to look at that specific population specifically. But that's something that you just enacted last year, if we're talking about the same thing. Yeah.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much. Julie, hi. I'm sorry that you left us last night. We're just finding our rhythm here.
No, it's fine. The rhythm I'm gonna need help with is how to share this. If you want full screen, or I can just share slide by slide. I don't know how to share my slides in full screen mode. It's a technical challenge. So I can just share sort of like the ugly version of PowerPoint. Okay, that will save us some time.
I think if you just share your screen and then you go into presentation mode, like as if you were in a big meeting.
Okay, if that works for, did it work? Okay, all right, yay, thank you. Also subtitles in case I mumble.
There's also a weird.
Yeah.
Did you turn that on, Sarsha? That's her computer. Oh, she's sharing on her computer.
Is this okay?
Yeah, you just have a voice activated thing.
Yeah, would you like me to turn it off?
It's a little distracting. And the YouTube already has that.
Oh, all right, give me a second.
It's okay if you can't.
It was, it's not quick. I'm sorry. Although if I go in this mode, you won't see it. So I can, so. All right, thank you for having me today. It's really nice to be here in person. For the record, I'm Julie Lowell. I'm a policy analyst at Public Assets Institute. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit fiscal policy think tank in Montpelier.
Are you good at that?
You want the full screen?
Yeah.
Yeah, even with the subtitles.
Oh, is that what
couldn't-
happens?
I can't
Okay,
turn it
great,
off.
then it doesn't matter.
Okay. Oh, wait, maybe? No, I
Okay.
can't. I'm sorry, I can't turn it
No,
on.
and I'm sorry that everything is.
All right, so at Public Assets, our mission is to improve the well-being of all Vermonters, advancing racial, social, and economic justice using research, fiscal analysis, and public engagement and empowerment. In my work, I specifically focus on policies that affect family economic security. And as part of that job, I also coordinate an Earned Income Tax Credit and Child Tax Credit Coalition that's working to increase financial stability for Vermont families so that they can meet their basic needs, live with dignity, and build stronger communities. Anti-poverty tax credits like the child tax credit are important policy tools to give families a stronger financial foundation. during the pandemic, we found that the temporarily expanded refundable tax credits, including the CTC, helped bring 10,000 people in Vermont out of poverty. So this 1 year look back brief is really exciting because it's our first look into how Vermont's new child tax credit, which was modeled off of the refundability of the federal credit, is impacting Vermonters. And as you've already noted a lot in your questions when Patrick was presenting, it raises a lot of additional questions that call for some additional data so that we can make sure that the credits are the most impactful. So today I'm going to highlight a few data points from the brief and then raise some of my follow-up questions. First, like I said, the report's a really good first start. And we need to understand more so that we can better understand who that group is that's not filing and how to make sure they can access these credits. So in tax year 2022, 21,000 families filed. And the original estimate when the bill was passed, this would be closer to 27,000 families. Sounds like Patrick has some ideas, but it'd be really good to understand where this discrepancy lies. As we've sort of already talked about, the CTC, it's a really effective anti-poverty tool, but only if people are filing. And so certain families don't have to be filing their taxes. So part of this process and this data deep dive needs to understand who those families are. Specifically, we could get a little bit more information into which families are filing who have no income and use some of our administrative tools like our reach up roles and our WIC and SNAP enrollment to try to begin to have a sense whether we can actually compare individual records or at least some numerical records around which families, how many families are eligible for the, would fall within those ranks compared to how many families are filing. The other opportunity here is that filers around the $26,000 mark or below don't have to file their taxes. So we could do a deeper data dive into administrative tax records to look at how many of those families filed and compare it more specifically to some of the census data. We know that in 2020, the IRS estimated that over 20% of eligible earned income tax credit filers in Vermont weren't applying for the credits. And so to put that in context, it's hard to get data on this, but in 2019, the Center on Budget estimated that that was a loss of $12 million for the state. So those were funds that families could have been getting to help make ends meet, and that also would be reinvested into local communities. The IRS reports that it's a laundry list of people that we think are being left out. It's people living in rural areas, the self-employed, those who are receiving disability income or who have children with disabilities, people not proficient in English, grandparents raising young children, and recently divorced households. These are the families that are the most likely not to participate in filing for these credits. So as Patrick noted, only 189 filers with zero income or less received the 2022 Vermont tax credit, child tax credit. So how many families without income or with low income did not file? And what other credits might they have missed on, both other state credits and federal credits that would be helping them and their families? The findings from a further deep dive into this that can then be used to help inform state outreach efforts to ensure that Vermonters with low incomes know about and are accessing the credits. And this is going to be really important moving forward. We've already begun to talk about the expansion of the credits in 2023 to residents who don't have individual taxpayer ID numbers and social security numbers. A lot of those residents aren't going to speak English. So it's going to be really important that we continue each year to do a data deep dive at the end of the tax filing season to really understand who are we missing out on and what systematic outreach can the state do to make sure that we're really getting word out to all of these populations and making sure the credits are accessible. One other thing that hasn't come up that I really want to note is that these credits are available for 3 years after the original tax filing deadline. So there's a real advantage in doing some of this data work because even retrospectively, we can be doing some of this outreach to get needed funds into the pockets of families. So that includes the 2022 tax filing year, but it also includes the 2021 filing year, which is when the feds did the expanded federal tax credit, which was even more generous. So there's some opportunities there for families in Vermont to get more resources they may have missed out on. The next thing I want to highlight is that we need more visibility on how the lowest income filers are filing. The report was really interesting in seeing that 97% of claimants filed electronically, and of those electronic filers, 8,300 used a paid provider. It'd be helpful to look at this data in more granular detail to see what percent of those incomes who have families with incomes less than $60,000 filed electronically, and of that group who used a paid provider. And the reason that I specify that $60,000 mark is because households with income around $60,000 qualify for the pre-filing services, which we've already mentioned today, the Community Actions Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Program, or the VITA program, as well as other pre-filing softwares. So these programs allow filers to keep their full credit so they can use it to cover their family needs. And one of the data points was that of the filers who received the CTC in 2022, just 227 were connected to VITA's programs in Vermont. But in 2022, Vermont's community action agencies helped over 4,000 Vermonters file their 2022 taxes. So just be really interesting to understand that disconnect a little bit and to dive into that. And the other piece that Patrick was talking of, who is not using the electronic services? Who's actually doing those paper forms? It would be interesting to see that, because if that group tends to skew more lower income, it's very likely that they are missing these credits. And the last thing I'll highlight is Vermont has two important anti-poverty tax credits, which we've already talked about, the child tax credit and the earned income tax credit, which provide resources to families and help lift them out of poverty. Unlike the CTC, which provides support for children under 6 regardless of whether or not their parent has earnings, the earned income tax credit's a refundable credit for workers who have low and moderate earnings, piggybacking off the federal EITC. So this credit increases with the number of the children in the house, and it includes children up to 19 and older in some cases. So what was really helpful for me in this brief is to actually see where the two qualifying populations overlapped. And only a quarter of the EITC claimants received the CTC. I think that, I'm not sure that Patrick highlighted that number, but we can see here, sorry, I'm down my slides. This is a map of what the EITC benefits look like. So this is the total federal and state benefits that a family gets. And what you can see is that the maximum federal and state EIC together can raise the annual income of a parent with one child. So if you look with all children. So if you look specifically at a family with one child, if they have $15,000 of income, the EITC gets them closer to $20,000, which provides them with some financial relief, bringing them closer to or even slightly above the poverty line, but it's still leaving them far from the $70,000 a year that the state's basic needs budget determines a single parent needs to make ends meet. So the tax credits are still far from closing the gap between what Vermont's minimum wage and average wage provide and what families require to make ends meet. So this is why the EITC and CTC coalition calls on lawmakers this year to increase Vermont's earned income tax credit. We're also asking the state to work on increasing accessibility of refundable tax credits so that families can maximize the benefit that they receive. And this includes, like we were talking about, more detailed granular data about who's getting the credits, and then using that data to make systematic state outreach. And finally, while the credits are doing important work, they could be doing even more if the state broadened eligibility to refundable tax credits, recognizing that their child tax credit leaves out families with older children who are still struggling to make ends meet, including older children with disabilities, and that the EITC excludes the youngest and older Vermonters if they don't have children. And there are more details in the testimony that I've submitted in the slides. So these credits are one piece of the puzzle, and they go a long way towards lifting people out of poverty, but we know the poverty line is still far from the state's basic needs budgets for all family types. The state's put a lot of time into creating the basic needs budget. I think some of you were part of that process this summer. And now we really need to be using those lines to be making actionable policy responses. And the anti-poverty tax credits are one part of that policy solution to get families closer to the line. So that's all I have today. Thank you for having me, and I look forward to answering any questions you have.
I'm curious your thoughts on the CTC and what you said about sort of the disconnect between the VITA. Do you have any thoughts there, and we sort of had, we had a number of conversations while you were sitting on the bench about bringing more people into filing status.
Yeah, I think I'd love to talk with Travis a little bit more at CVOYO to see, I was so surprised by that number, but I didn't have a lot of time to digest it because it seemed so low. And this is why it would be really helpful to have that number of who under $60,000 is filing electronically and which of those are using paid providers, because I think there's really an opportunity here to try to connect people with more supports to access the credits. And there has been kind of a push nationally to make the filing process easier for people. And so I think that's sort of the next step that the state needs to take on.
Any other questions? Thanks. Thanks for coming in. Sorry to rush you through. I think we are now back to the floor. And tomorrow, we're not coming back here on the floor, but we are here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Everyone hear that? 9 a.m.